Next, we're going to be talking about the partner network. AWS provides a lot of core primitives, but really it's our partner ecosystem that brings a lot of pieces together. So it's not really about, oh, you either build it all on AWS or you have a partner do it. It ends up being a combination of all those. So up next is Bhavik.
Thank you. I think this should be on. Thank you. Green button only. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bhavik. I work on the AWS partner team. As just introduced, I manage our wider ecosystem with a bunch of colleagues, and our job is to build an ecosystem that you can leverage to accelerate your journey to the cloud. So I'm going to go through some of the things that our customers are doing in terms of innovating with respect to their media content and their workloads on AWS, and then specifically highlight how our partners are helping in that journey, just to give you ideas and things to consider as you begin your journey to the cloud or begin to advance your existing journey to the cloud. One of the things we really hope our customers do and see, and the stories we love to tell, is all about what our customers are building and how they're experimenting. And both of these things lead to innovation. And if you're not innovating with respect to what you're doing, then in a world like today, then that puts you on the back foot with respect to what your customers are expecting of you. And so the ability to build and experiment is something that we're extremely fond of as a company. It's something very ingrained in the Amazon DNA. But it's also surfaced and hopefully available to you as an option when you look at using the cloud. And so building and experimenting becomes a key thing, I think, especially in media and entertainment workloads, because you always have to be thinking about what you need to do next with respect to your data or your content or the experiences that you're building for your customers. And so what we hope from a platform perspective is that you can do more of that innovation, more of that experimentation, more of that risk-taking, but actually with less risk in doing that. Meaning that with the cloud, as you know, you can pay for what you use. There's no commitments. You can use the same infrastructure on a global basis. But that allows for you to hopefully experiment and try new things. And so for all of the services and features and all of the great stories you've heard today, hopefully it allows you to think about things that you might wish to try, that trying to do it on-premise would be difficult because you have to get servers or storage or permission to procure stuff. But in the cloud, you can experiment, and that's one thing that we really hope to foster and something that we really hope to drive with you in that journey. So doing more with less risk, allowing you to build and innovate and experiment is very much part of our DNA and what our customers are doing on the platform. And so some of the examples that I'm going to give in the remainder of this presentation really focus on that, really our customers trying new things and experimenting to see if they work or if they don't. And if they don't work, that's absolutely fine, because if you're not trying, and then everything's going to work the first time, but that constant iteration becomes a really important component of this overall journey. We're extremely fortunate to learn from industry leaders. Many of you in this room, many logos on this slide, but really looking and standing on the shoulders of giants with respect to the business transformation they're going to, how they're embracing cloud-based technologies, how they're allowing us to tell their story, and they're telling the story themselves, which allows you to, again, think about things that you might wish to experiment or try, or even learn things that you'd thought about doing that have actually been done, which you then go and replicate. All of this is reducing that risk, hopefully, over time. So we're exceptionally fortunate to be able to learn from many of these customers and actually help them in their experimentation and innovation. From a macro trend perspective, you've heard today, we sort of see three macro trends. One, the ability to really understand your customers. So understanding who's watching your content, why they're watching it, where they're watching it, when they're watching it, so that you can inform yourself with respect to the investments that you're going to make. We see a very big focus on the experience, and that could be the storytelling experience, it could be the content experience, it could be like what we just saw with WeatherBug, which is a virtual assistant when it comes to telling the weather. There's many ways in which you can evolve the experience and focus on your customer to continue to deliver that differentiation. At the end of the day, when we go home, we've only got 3 or 4 hours to watch something, and everyone's fighting for that time window. And so this experience in many different dimensions becomes super important. And another big trend that we see is our customers looking to build for reach, meaning that your content repurposed for countries, repurposed for different languages, but the ability to get your content from where you make it to a worldwide audience, if that's what you're looking to do, becomes really important. Like we've got a global audience that we're trying to often reach, and our customers, especially from the media content perspective, getting your content into the right format, in the right language, complying to the right standards becomes a very complex task. but driving that experience, maybe a global audience, delivering that content in the right ways at the right times, as efficiently as possible becomes a very important trend that we're seeing, and a piece that you'll see as I get into my use case examples. So how are things being built? So you've seen today our platform, right? So you've seen many things that AWS offers from a native perspective. So going from the bottom of this slide up, our core compute services, storage, compute, networking that really build the infrastructure foundation for many of the applications that you're going to run. You've heard a lot about how AWS Elemental is moving from an appliance, has moved from appliance to cloud, and also enabling hybrid workflows around many different types of video content workflows, as live and file. You've heard from the ThinkBox team about how rendering and visual effects can be done in the cloud and how you can leverage those technologies. And then you've seen sprinkled out through many of the stories the real-time use of AI and ML to extract metadata, to create metadata, to enhance the way in which you're possibly asking business questions and looking to answer them. So these are all the way in which our platform facilitates for components of the media workflow. But similarly, we have many partners that leverage these technologies to really provide the business applications that you're often dealing with also. So we know it's extremely complex when you look at news production or live sporting events or asset management systems. But the ability to build that application layer in addition to leveraging native cloud components or not becomes a very complex task. So we are looking to enable, with our partners and with our platform, a very complex, we're trying to enable you to do very complex things in a highly dynamic environment. So we want to be able to help you go from on-premise workflows to hybrid workflows to cloud-based. And the easier we can do that for you with partner technologies and solutions that we offer ourselves, hopefully the easier it is for you, again, to experiment and think forward about the things that you wish to do. And then also not having to be constrained with potentially how you've done them on premise. So these are sort of some steps in that journey, right? The ability to use compute at a scalable way, at a low cost way, becomes very advantageous from a cloud perspective. Being able to use the same application and ISV technologies on premise and in the cloud allows you to maintain workflows and your API investments, allowing you to control and secure and give access to content or processes in a seamless way becomes very important, authenticating users and things like that. And then having the ability to create global and dynamic workflows, meaning either replicating perhaps what you do in New York, in LA, or in Singapore, or having a hybrid asset management system that could give you a federated view of content irrespective of where it's created and stored. So we see many of these steps happening in the evolution of media workflows as we look at the cloud. So it's not just cloud only, and we definitely know as we get more into production and broadcasting, there's a lot of people in venues or in studios or on site that have to interface with things that are remote, and facilitating that becomes very important from an evolution and a perspective. One of the things we do with our customers also, and our partners, is help them design well for the cloud. And so if you're not familiar with the program called Well Architected, we use this as a way of measuring different levels of integration on the platform. So how well are you secured? How well are you building for reliability? How well are you cost optimizing your deployment on AWS? One of the things we do, and our account teams will definitely help you with, is reducing your spend on AWS. And so we go out of our way there to give you tools and methodologies and also analysis that we can do to ensure that you're not overspending or overpaying for what you use, because that becomes very important, again, returning money back to you to try new things. Cost optimization is associated with that, and then operational excellence. So one of the big hurdles that we see is that it's very new to run, maintain, and operate a system in the cloud than it is on-premise. There's just very different ways of doing it. CI/CD and pipeline tools, monitoring, things like that. And how you do that are ways in which we can also guide you. And so these become essential principles for our customers that build, but also for our partners that are building technology stacks that you might ultimately deploy as a customer. So these become very good principles as we look forward. The other thing we do is we spend, and the team that I'm on, we build these partner ecosystems to very much support the type of projects and workflows and workloads that you're looking to deploy. So we've mentioned Elemental, and we build a partner ecosystem around Elemental to support the live video and file-based workflows. We have a huge ecosystem around visual effects and rendering, specifically supporting the ThinkBox application set. And then on the broader workloads across media and entertainment, we're very lucky to have hundreds of partners that do very different things, from asset management to broadcast playout, to visual effects and rendering, or pipeline technologies, or virtual desktops. So this ecosystem becomes very important to that continuity, meaning that we hope to match what is running in the cloud with what you use on premise, so that when you're ready to experiment or move, you have that parity from on-prem to cloud, if you wish to. And so this allows people then to build for the future. So that experimentation, that innovation, that trying new things with these partners in the cloud and or on-premise becomes key. And so the way we visualize this coming together in multiple different facets of the production to distribution workflow is sort of around these sort of core boxes. But what we're building up here is production through to distribution. And what we find and what we hear from some of our key media customers that are looking to deploy content nationally and globally is that the supply chain in the middle, how you package, store, process your content and ready it for delivery, becomes the most interesting thing for you to transform when you look at the cloud. And so this piece in the middle, where you're going to look at, okay, if I'm creating content, do I need to push it to a mobile device, a smart TV? Is it going to go to an iPad? Is it going to go to cable or satellite? Or am I selling it as a transaction-based asset? Really, the supply chain should be agnostic to that process. Ultimately, you have content, you create it, you will then package it for the right formats in the way that you're going to distribute it based on your monetization choice. And so one of the big trends that we see from our customers is trying to figure out the complexity of that distribution. As the world changes and as cable, satellite, OTT, direct-to-consumer become models that you have to consider in the way that you sell, even if you sell your content to other providers, you still have to package it for them. And so this agile supply chain becomes a very important engine that we see being built on top of content lakes and data lakes and serverless technologies and AI and ML. And what we see then is this feedback loop, which is if you're investing in content and you have to make content, storing that content in production is very expensive. It's also very costly to move around. So the rise of virtual desktops and studios in the cloud that would enable remote editing or remote visual effects becomes very key, because you don't have to move it again, which allows you to then push into a supply chain, which allows you to dynamically package that for distribution. And then the important thing is being able to instrument and measure all of the performance metrics, all of the quality, how people are watching your content, analyzing that data, and then making informed decisions about where you invest in your next round of programming becomes very key. And so that's what we see with our big media customers and small, is how do they instrument, how do they change, how do they drive metrics out of what you've built for many decades on premise, and how can you be more smarter about the way you make your decisions next. This isn't easy, but it's all beginning to come together because of the way we can collect data, analyze data, and you can ask the right business questions to hopefully get the right answers. And so this is happening on AWS with our customers. So what we've done here is mapped really some of our big customer names that have been public about what they're doing against those similar principles. So you'll see that we have Sony ImageWorks or WB doing the content processing and post-production. In the asset management supply chain, we've got companies like Discovery and Sony and 21st Century Fox and PBS really looking to evolve the way they do many of their sort of quite rigid processes on premise. On the distribution side, you've heard from Elemental today about how there's many advances on the OTT streaming side. But going up from that, and one of my case studies next is going to be about Discovery, which is doing linear channel origination from AWS. Upstream from that is the supply chain component too. So, and then down below we see companies leveraging machine learning and analytics to either enhance their consumer experience or to derive data that helps them become smarter about what they're doing with respect to their own business processes. And then this next slide now is a slightly augmented version of this, which is showing how our partners are equally influencing these. And so we know from a platform perspective, when our customers are using AWS, they're always going to be using a partner solution to drive that consumption. So in visual effects and rendering, it's solutions like Maya or Foundry, Nuke. We've got partners like Bebop that are doing virtualized video editing, where you can bring Avid or Adobe editors to a virtual workstation running on AWS. I mentioned a little bit about supply chain, so SDVI doing supply chain for all of that content management and acquisition. We spoke a little bit about playout, and then you'll see some examples there on the AI/ML side about really enhancing that user experience and extracting real-time data from video, perhaps, to augment what our customers are seeing from the endpoint. So these are great stories for us to talk about. So what I'm going to do next is just go into a little bit more about what these partners are building with these customers. So if we look at post-production as an example, we have done a number of things in the last few years to ready the platform and to enable our customers that are in post-production to actually store content in the cloud. And so that started out with allowing you to write security controls that would comply to MPAA type of standards. Secondly, about this time last year, we launched studio-grade security guides. So this allows you to store pre-release content for rendering and visual effects and for asset management that you would be required to show the ability to write the right security controls to store that content to process it in the cloud. And these became an enabler for this case study that I can talk about now, or we've talked about actually for the last year, which is the rendering of the Sherlock Gnomes movie on AWS. And so this movie was owned and released by Paramount. The production company was Mikros, which is owned by Technicolor, and they used AWS as the rendering platform to do all of the full animated movie shots. And so I think about 90% of this was rendered on AWS. So I think 4.3 million cores, or million hours of compute, 2,000 concurrent instances running across 2 different regions. But the key piece to this is around the security of that content. So we're using EC2 and EC2 Spot to drive down cost. They were using RenderMan as their pipeline manager. They were using Autodesk and Foundry as their renderers and shaders. But specifically, the leveraging of Spot reduces price. You want capacity, which means you have to go multi-region, so you can get the cheapest price, because that's what you're trying to do, especially in this world of rendering, where margin, if you can reduce your infrastructure costs, that is either cost savings for you as the customer, or you can pass those through to your client. The key thing about this for our customer here was the ability, because we were lowering prices for them, we could increase their creativity with respect to what they were designing and developing for their client. So if you have a fixed cost for your compute, that means for every creative version of, let's say, Sherlock Gnomes here, you might want 3 different styles, which means you're going to have to pay for 3 different renditions and renders. If you can cut that cost in half, then you could do 6 for the same price, theoretically, or you could just cut the price in half for 3. But one of the key benefits that our customer had here was the ability for them to be more creative about what they were designing and what they were rendering, because they knew that the cost of doing that was much lower. And so that creativity allowed them to differentiate themselves as a company when it came to doing the movie and providing their main job, which was on the creative side. So this becomes a very interesting story, enabled by those ISE studio controls, which were required ultimately by Paramount to actually do. Another good example here for production side is the evolution of remote editing. And so we're seeing this become a key driver actually in this whole, I would say, virtualized production shift. And so we're still in the early stages, but with GPUs and solutions like Teradici or solutions like Bebop, which offer a managed video editing platform, you can now do remote editing, multi-monitor, using solutions like Teradici to stream it down. And if you have a supply chain or an infrastructure that's putting content in the cloud first, then putting that into an edit station and building your editorial processes without having to pull stuff down can become compelling to some customers. And so in this case with Meredith, they were able to remote many of their workstations to actually do the same. And so I'll come back to this, because we're also beginning to see this trend emerging in live production, where you might not wish to send editors remotely, but if you can bring the content back in time and then do remote editing, it can become equally advantageous. So visual effects, editing, and we're at the beginning here. One of the key enablers, I think, for us as we look forward for video editing, as you know, most editors will run on Windows or Mac. If they run on Windows, you need a Windows shared file system. And I think last November, we launched FSX for Windows, which is shared Windows storage, which could be put at the back of Adobe Premiere or Avid, so you can have that collaborative Windows shared environment to drive some of these workflows. And that becomes another enhancement here as we see the adoption of these type of deployments. Another good example for production was the FIFA World Cup by Fox Sports. And so so Fox Sports had the rights to show the FIFA World Cup last year in the United States. As you know, you may know, the FIFA World Cup was run in Russia, generally in Moscow, which is where their host broadcasting center was. Fox Sports is based in LA, which is about 5,000 miles away from Moscow. So they had certain production requirements that they wanted to meet to do what they were doing in terms of production. So firstly, they wanted to be able to edit live content in less than 30 seconds from game with their editors. They wanted to enable sub-clip editing to be put back into their programming during a game, and they wanted to be able to have the entire game available for post-game editing so that they could run their promos and pre-match content. And so Fox Sports did something quite innovative here, which is they decided to keep all of their editors in LA, and they estimated that the cost of keeping their editors in LA would save them $100,000 per editor. So there was a huge cost savings by not moving them. But in order to do that, they had to move their content from Moscow through AWS to their facilities. And so what we have here is from right to left on this, left to right on this slide, we have the Moscow host broadcasting center, which is receiving the camera feeds. We're going from SDI to IP. Fox used various technologies from Aspera and Telestream to go from SDI to IP. They used IP transit to send HLS and AVC wrapped content over the wide area network through AWS, writing it to S3, and then going from S3 back to their facilities in LA so they could put it back into their video editing environments. And so this allowed for multiple things for Fox. Firstly, they could in real time essentially move content from source to destination. They could write it to the cloud. They also had a file-based workflow against this too, which means that all file-based content, in addition to the video, had to be antivirus scanned before coming into their production environment. And so they moved 22,000 assets over the course of 4 weeks. Ultimately, they wrote to S3 about 3 petabytes of data. So that's 64 games recorded at 100 megabits per second, all written to S3, 22,000 assets, all antivirus scanned. But they did the antivirus scanning in AWS prior to pulling it down. And the innovation for them here was that they had antivirus running for their corporate data centers, but they didn't have enough capacity to run just for this game. So they didn't have to invest in that infrastructure, but they also could quarantine everything that they brought in the cloud before pushing it to their asset management system. So this becomes a very interesting way of doing remote production. It's semi-live, right? So we're edging towards doing much more from a live production perspective. But this was innovative, number of reasons. One, transferring the video, storing it in the cloud, doing the antivirus, and then also facilitating a real-time, high-profile event from the customer's perspective. Moving into asset supply chain now. So we did a little bit of production, so visual effects rendering, a movie, we can do video editing. Asset management and supply chain becomes very interesting. So one great example, again, Fox Film now, was them building their film archive on AWS and trying as much as they could to build serverless components to drive that workflow. And so without, these slides will all be available to you, but one of the key things I thought was really innovative about this is Fox wanted to build an asset management system that their users could program against. So they didn't want to be in the business of customizing their asset management system to deal with the various evolving business needs that their internal clients would have. And so Fox chose Vitaspine as their core asset management layer. And they built an API on top of Vitaspine, and they built serverless workflows using Lambda and S3 and DynamoDB and asset management registries to basically build the workflows that would ingest content, register content, present content. But they also published then APIs that their own developers could write against. And this is actually a wonderful blog post on the AWS site that you can read that was written by the engineer of this system. But it was a great example of moving a film archive, but building serverless workflows around it, and then building an API wrapper that their internal customers could then program against. And that freed them substantially from being reliant upon an asset management system and that partner specifically to have to evolve their own products so they could separate the two. So that's a very, very interesting use case. Another great one actually by a partner here, Veritone, which is for the college football playoff. So this customer in particular, so the college football playoff company, needed to publish all of their games to 1,800 media partners for the event that they were operating. And so managing 1,800 vendors was high overhead for them. Having those media partners be able to search, download content that they need for whatever they're doing for their own programming purposes had a high degree of overhead. And then transcoding and storing all of that content and making it searchable was also very difficult. So Veritone provided the asset management system as a SaaS. They provided the indexing and the metadata extraction. And they provided the AI to get that metadata technologies such that the customer here, College Football Playoff Group, could basically post almost in real time the game content that they were capturing from venues, post it to this website, and allow their media partners to search, select, and download content that was needed for them in almost real time. So this is a very interesting way of, again, just looking at the asset management component, but also coupling it a bit to supply chain, because as you all know, storing your assets is one thing, but then when someone asks for it in a certain format, or you're bringing it in a certain format and you have to transcode it or do video quality analysis, many different things, the ability to automate these workflows as part of your asset management component, so coupling supply chain and asset management becomes very compelling. So this is another great example of just reducing the overhead that the customer had in managing assets on behalf of their media partners that needs to pull them down. Broadcast and supply chain becomes the next area that we've really learned from our customers about what they wish to do. And so our friends at Discovery have been a great example of pioneering broadcast playout. I've got Dave actually in the room. Thanks, Dave. But this is a very interesting story in multiple areas. I think the supply chain component, using solutions like SDVI to manage inbound assets at scale, the ability to then register those assets and push them through manual or automated QC systems. But then secondly, then doing linear channel origination from the cloud was the next thing that they evolved in. So these two things together become part of that initial story I was telling, which is trying to build ultimately something that's very agnostic to the changing nature of our business, which is we don't know how our customers are going to consume our content, and we want the ability generally to have our customers be able to consume our content in whatever venue they wish. But how do you do that across multiple different languages, multiple different countries, with different standards, compliance, and rules and regulations around it? And so this transformation story here was fantastic, but it's also industry first for playout, and then also for the supply chain component. So this is a wonderful example of just that innovation and experimentation to get it done. Switching now to more the user experience. So another partner that we have outside, you might have heard this story about the royal wedding. So this was taking AI, ML data, and actually providing a user experience that customers could benefit from. And so for the royal wedding, a big event, if you like weddings and royalty, what Sky specifically wanted to do here was allow their users on a mobile phone to get information about the celebrities attending the wedding. And they wanted to do that in real time. So as the cameras were moving across the audience, they wanted to be able to zone in on certain people like Hector and then give a little bio or a profile about that person. And so but the key aspect of this was doing it in real time during the event, which means that they had to build models for all of the people that were going to attend the event. They had to build models that would look at face detection while people are wearing hats and are in shadows and things like that, such that the quality of information presented to the user was accurate and meaningful and enhanced the experience that they had in terms of watching the wedding. And so the workflow for this is quite interesting because you're taking a live video input, you're sending it to the cloud, you're doing video transcoding, you're instantly pushing that to an AI ML engine that's extracting the data. You're taking that face and you're matching it to metadata about that person, and then you're pushing that to a mobile device such that the user can then see it. And so I think the turnaround time for this was 10 seconds or less in terms of that full match. And so this becomes a very interesting way of using ML and video processing and the cloud, multiple different components, all stitched together to really enhance that user experience, which is what, from the customer perspective, they really wanted to innovate on. And so with that, I'm going to finish. So thank you for listening to me. We've got great partners out there. These are wonderful stories. We hope that you do the same or work with us to achieve the same output. So thank you for listening to me. I'll hand it back to Hector. Thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for attending. So a few call outs. We have the surveys. Please fill out the surveys. We definitely listen to your feedback about what's the content that you find most valuable and how we can make these symposiums more valuable. We're going to have our next one in Los Angeles on June 12th, so be on the lookout for that. We'll have the sites available for you to download probably next week, early next week. So be on the lookout at aws.amazon.com/blog/media, or just look for the AWS Media blog, and it's one of the first things that shows up. And finally, happy hour outside. So enjoy and thank you for coming.